Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's lovely to be here again with NFFN and with Reese and with my colleague Anna, who is Conservation Officer for Bumblebee Conservation and is actually leading on this work. Yeah, really good that lots of you have come back for a little bit more learning and understanding about bumblebees. And what we're going to do this evening, basically, my beginner training covers 2 sessions normally. One session is identification of bumblebees, and the other session is bumblebee recording and beewalk. And that normally takes 2 evenings. So I'm squashing 2 evening sessions into one. So you're basically going to get sort of half of each thing, but in such a way that you should have enough information to go out and start recording bumblebees, hopefully, or you know, take the next steps into learning about them. And what I've decided to do, I usually do bumblebee recording and beewalk second, but I'm going to do it first tonight because I thought we'd get the slightly drier and more boring bit out of the way. And then we will focus on all the lovely photos of bumblebees and learning to identify some of the species. So for those who weren't here last week, I should have said, my name is Claire Flynn and I'm Project Officer. I'm Anna's colleague and my project is called Skills for Bees Cymru. Okay, so why do we need to record and monitor bumblebees? And by record and monitor, I'm talking about identifying species, where they occur and submitting that information as biological data, basically as biological records. Well, along with many other plants and animals in our landscape, as I'm sure you're aware, bumblebees have suffered massive declines, basically since the end of the Second World War. There's been quite a dramatic decline in our UK bumblebees and indeed bumblebees across the world. And in the UK, over a third of our bumblebee species have declined by more than 70% between 1900, when records really began, and 1980, when they did the first kind of really quantitative study of decline. And, you know, that is obviously quite catastrophic and indeed has been for some species, with 2 having gone extinct in the last few decades in the UK. And we have got 2 on the kind of cusp of extinction now, really, the great yellow in Scotland and the shrill-card bee, which does occur in Wales. In Wales, the picture is almost identical. We've suffered declines across the country since records began, and because of that, in Wales we have 5 species. They're printed in red, which are listed as of conservation concern within Wales: the shrill carder, the brown-banded carder, the moss carder, the red-shanked carder, and the ruderal bumblebee. I've never seen a red-shanked carder or a ruderal bumblebee, and the ruderal has not been seen in Wales for nearly 20 years, so we may already have lost that one here. The broken-belted bumblebee and the spilberry bumblebee are also scarce. And in fact, across the UK, we only have actually 8 out of our 24 species that we can consider common and widespread. So only 8 have actually been able to maintain a reasonably good distribution since the decline started. Now, there are many reasons for these declines, as I'm sure as landowners you are very, very aware of, especially if your families have been farmers. You know, times past, they'll have memories of very, very different landscapes and farming the land in different ways. And of course, the majority of our farming is very intensive, and the biggest driving factor of bumblebee declines is habitat loss. It's as simple as that. It's not chemicals, although obviously that's a factor. it isn't diseases, it is loss of our flower-rich landscapes and habitats such as hedgerows, field margins, messy bits in the landscape, if you like. So this picture is actually, I've said this before, it's completely inappropriate for Wales because we don't have huge fields of arable fields like that. If anyone has a good picture of fields of silage, bright green silage, that would be more appropriate. But the point is the same. Okay, that intensive farming has basically led to, unfortunately, declines in wildlife across all taxonomic groups, not least of which, you know, bees have suffered very much. And again, you know, last week, if you were here, I talked about pollination. Now, so you'll know just how important bees as a group are, and bumblebees in particular have their own specific value within this. But in terms of insect pollination as a whole, in the UK, quite some years ago now, we haven't got any kind of up-to-date figures, but 603 million was the value of insect pollination in agriculture, and insects actually pollinate 75% of our crop species in the UK. Okay, and then those figures, I won't read those up, that they're amplified up, and obviously the replacement costs on top of that, if we had to pollinate things ourselves, are enormous. You know, the point is they have huge economic value. And also, as I touched on last week, the fact that insects and bees and bumblebees in particular pollinate almost all of our wild and garden plants, the loss of these species and the loss of their diversity, so the loss of different species within that group, would cause and has caused changes to our countryside and may well continue to do so. So, conserving bumblebees, you know, there's lots of work done on habitat improvements, etc., and giving advice to landowners at landscape scales and local scales. But really, the underpinning of all of that is data. So we need information on what bumblebees we've got, where they're occurring, and how they're doing over time. So that is kind of my job really within Wales, is to increase the amount of data we have. But to do that, we need volunteers with skills and knowledge of bumblebee identification and recording, because long gone are the days where we'd have, you know, just a few very well-to-do naturalists going out and spending all of their time recording. Historically, that's how we got data. Now, we're in such desperate need of data that the idea of citizen science and crowdsourcing has become incredibly important to informing conservation decisions. And well-designed citizen science schemes, such as beewalk, can help fill this gap in data. And my project looks at addressing huge gaps we have in Wales, both regionally, and North Wales, we have a lot of gaps, but also species gaps. You know, species that we have less data on because they're difficult to identify, for example. So that's my day job, if you like. So when we talk about recording bumblebees, we are talking about turning our observations into pieces of data which have value in terms of assessing populations. And we call that, those bits of data, if you like, biological records. And when we submit a biological record, we basically want to know what it is we've seen, where we saw it, who saw it, and when. So who, what, when, and where. And there are two main methods of doing this, and both are really accessible to everybody with a little bit of training. And, you know, hopefully tonight I'll give you the start of that learning process. So unstructured recording means submitting ad hoc records into iRecord or your local environmental record centre, which I'll come to in a minute. And this gives us distribution data for species. So we can start to put points on a map. So if one of you, after tonight's session, submits an observation of a red-tailed bumblebee in your garden in Wrexham, then we know that there's a red-tailed bumblebee there. We don't know how the species is doing there, or whether it's a one-off or whether it's really common, but it gives us a piece of data. Okay, so that's unstructured recording, and that's fairly easy to learn to do. It's quite addictive, and it can be done for any wildlife that you see once you know the basics. Structured recording, i.e. standardized method, so bringing a bit of science into this part, is recording as part of a scientifically designed scheme, such as Beewalk, though there are others. And this can provide us with much stronger data because it can provide us both with distribution, so points on a map, but it can also give us numbers so we can see how common species are in a particular area, but it can also give us data which is comparable over time. And using structured recording, we can begin to really analyse how our species are doing and how they're responding to different pressures, such as, for example, climate change or individual climate events like very hot summers or very wet springs or whatever it is. Okay. So I'm going to give you an intro to both of those tonight and different ways you can get involved. So in Wales, we have 4 local, I've said local record centres there, I should put local environment record centres, the LERCs we call them for short, and they hold the majority of Welsh biodiversity data for all of our wildlife in Wales. So we've got Cofnod in the north, Bis covers the whole of Powys, WW is my local LERC, that's the west and the south, and then the heavily populated bits, Swansea, the valleys, Cardiff, etc., is covered by Subrec. They're run by a lovely bunch of people. They're absolutely brilliant. They do loads of activities. Definitely Google their websites. They're really easy to find. And you can submit your ad hoc one-off records into these guys, and they will be very glad to receive your data. Now, there are several ways you can do this. Okay, and this is something you can do, you know, if you've got children about the 8, 9, 10 mark in age who are really interested in wildlife, this is something that you can do with them as well, because you can submit records of anything, robins, blackbirds, oak trees, whatever you want, not just bumblebees. But each local environmental record centre has 4 ways to submit information. And I'm not going to go into detail now, but you can do it online via their website. This is a screenshot of one of the, I think this is Cofnod's website up in North Wales. So you can just go on and find their online recording system. The way I would totally recommend, if you've got a smartphone and you're into your apps, download the LERC Wales app. It's free and it's brilliant. It's bilingual and it is really easy to use, and you can submit stuff on the go. So if you're out walking the dogs, you see a red-tailed bumblebee, you can just get the app up and whop it in and take a picture as well and submit it. Very often areas have local experts in each species group. So I'm the bee recorder for Pembrokeshire. So you can get advice and you can submit records via local county recorders, and the LERCs, the LERCs, will always tell you who your county recorders are. Or you can do it quite an old-fashioned way now. You can do it via email on their spreadsheet, their recording spreadsheet, or even on a bit of paper in the post. Okay, if that's what you're more comfortable with. But basically submitting records, all the information is on the LERC websites, so do have a look if you'd like to find out more. But I'm just going to plug the app. That's the symbol on the App Store or on Google Play, the little lurk symbol there in lovely green, and that's just for Wales, and it's fantastic, and it's really, really lovely to use. There is a YouTube video. Reese and Anna, I don't know if I put that in the links, because I've asked Reese and Anna to put some links in the chat, but there is a link to how to use the app there. And there's a UK-wide app which does the same thing, called iRecord, which you might have heard of, and those two are pretty interchangeable. So it doesn't matter which app you use, the records will still go to the local environmental. Thanks, Reese. So now I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Beewalk. Now, Beewalk is the citizen science scheme, which is run by the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and it's one of the only standardised pollinator monitoring schemes countrywide in the whole of the world, in fact. It's been going for 10 years and it's really, really well designed. And the data that it's given us is giving us really critical information on how our bees are doing. We've got an awful lot of data now. So the aims of Beewalk are to gather both abundance, so numbers, and distribution data. So not just the spots on the map, but how those spots are fluctuating. Its aim is to analyse this data and report trends to our bee walkers and the rest of the world in how our UK bumblebee populations are doing over time. And it aims to investigate the causes of changing trends, for example, climate change and habitat change. And hopefully, Anna, I can't see the chat when I'm presenting, but hopefully Anna or Reese can put the Beewalk website link into the chat, and also the Beewalk, the surveys page, please, guys, from Bumblebee Conservation Trust website, to give you an overview. So how do we do a Beewalk? Well, volunteers do Beewalks for us, like yourselves, people that have done training. And the idea is that you walk a monthly transect from March to October, so that's bumblebee season. The transect needs to be between 1 and 2 kilometres long. And bumblebees are identified and counted along the different sections of the transect. Oh, I'll go back a sec. The sections are defined normally by habitat. So for example, if it was one across one of your farms, you might start off in the farmyard, you know, walk up the track along the hedgerow. So that might be one section, and then across a meadow, that could be a second section, you know, through some damp grassland, which could be a fourth section, and then back along another track back to where you started, which could be the fifth section. And that is all sort of designed within the Beewalk website. So I'll show you that in a sec. When you've done your walks through the season and you've got your data, you submit it straight to the Bumblebee Conservation Trust. So it doesn't go, in this case, to the lurks. It goes into our record database via the Beewalk website. But we then, at a later date, share that with the lurks. So we're working together to maximise our information sharing. Okay. So setting up your Beewalk. So for you guys on your land, you know, if you wanted to do one where you're based on your land, it makes sense. Normally I'm talking to people who aren't farmers and landowners, so they don't have that choice, but you guys obviously do. You'd plan a route which is safe and accessible, as I've already said, taken in different habitats. So it could be on your land, it could be a local nature reserve, it could be a park, it could be through a village, could even take in an industrial area. I've seen some of the rarest bees in Britain in Port Talbot around the steelworks. So, you know, it doesn't have to be in pristine, beautiful meadows. We need data from everywhere. And as I've already said, 1 and 2 kilometres long. And if you were walking it normally at a slowish pace, but steady, you'd expect to take about 60 minutes to walk it, okay? Because remember, you're looking at bees en route. And as I said, there should be 3 distinct sections at least, and I'll come to that in a sec. And before you, you know, log your walk on the Beewalk website, we suggest you make a dedicated visit. In your case, it might be over your own land, so you might not need to actually map your route. Okay, so that's quite a fun bit. And what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to break from my slides and I'm going to take you to the Beewalk, because normally I just go through screenshots, but I'm actually going to go a bit quicker tonight, and I'm actually going to take you to the Beewalk website. Is that okay, Reese? Can you see that okay?
All good.
Yep. Well, okay, so this is our Beewalk website. It's separate from the Bumblebee Conservation Trust website, but it has the same branding, so it looks similar. When you go onto it, you'll see this page. Now you can see my login details are already there. That would obviously be empty when you first go on. And registration is a 2-step process. So when you register, you would click on here, and this would take you to a Google registration form. And all that does is register your details as a bee walker with us. So then we have your email and where you are, etc., etc. And there's also a little ID test as well, but don't let that put you off. Okay, it's not to put people off, it's just to give us an idea of if you need more support or whatever. So you do that, and that means you're a registered bee walker. You'll be on our bee walker mailing list. You'll have access to our volunteers at Learning Zone, all our annual reports and everything else. So all that does is means you're part of the fold, if you like. You're part of the flock, the Beewalk flock, the Beewalk family. So when you've done that and sent that off, that's fine. Then you'll want to set yourself up an account on the actual Beewalk website. So there's 2 steps to registration. So for you guys, you would click on create new account. Hopefully it should do that. Yeah, so I'm already in there, but you would create new account via this form, this online form, and that will go to our lovely Beewalk officer, Sally, and she will send you an email activating your Beewalk account. Okay, so once you've got your account set up, it is a bit of a faff, I'm not going to lie, but once you've done it, you only have to do it once. So I'm logging into my account now. So once you've had your activation email off Sally, she only usually takes a day or 2, you're officially a bee walker, even though you might not have actually done a bee walk yet. And just to give you an idea, the first thing you're presented with is this heat map of bee walk data. And if we go into Wales, it's quite interesting. So the Trust has traditionally worked a lot along this South Wales corridor. So you can see the red spots where we've got the most bee walk records. So you can see down in South Thames, around Newport and Cardiff, Swansea, Port Talbot. But the picture is, we haven't got a single bee walk in Brecon Beacons. I'm working on that at the moment. Haven't got a single bee walk in Snowdonia, and very few in Mid and North Wales. So we're missing massive chunks. And none even on the Llŷn Peninsula, although there is one bee walk, but it doesn't look like there's hardly any records there, maybe a few. Okay, so we need more bee walks, folks, in Wales. We really do. Lots of bees going undetected. So once you're in the Beewalk website, I'm going to go through this quite quick. How am I doing for time, Reese?
It's past.
Okay, I'll just spend 5 minutes. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, okay? But basically, when you set up a transect, for example, let's go Templeton Village there, where I live. You're taken to your site details, which you put in as you construct your Beewalk. So its name, the grid reference comes up when you click on the map, etc. The length comes up automatically at the end when you've put your sections in, year established, etc. That's quite an easy page. You draw your route using our, I'll just put the aerial picture on because it looks a bit nicer. There we are. There's the route round a little bit in my village and round the farm. This is a lovely slurry pit that's been dug for the indoor dairy farm that's just up the road from me, so that's a bit sad, but yeah, this is one of my bee walks, and you draw the route on this page. There are full instructions there, and then for each of the sections on your route you pick habitats from the drop down menu, so they're all there for you to choose from. So that's a very, very, very quick intro. But what I do want to draw your attention to, I'll just put in, there's entering your data, you use your the calendar here, and when you've done a walk, you click on the green circle, and that's how you enter your counts, your bumblebees and your counts. But what I do want to draw your attention to is the resources page. And on here, we have a full guidance document, a quick start guide, etc., etc. Monthly recording form, that's really important when you take out and do your bee walk. Okay, so for you to fill in your numbers of bees. So that's a very, very quick guide to bee walk, the Beewalk website. And do have a look at that. Obviously, and even if you do register and you go on and you decide it's not for you, that's fine, but there's loads of information there to help. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip a load of slides now. This is the monthly recording form that is on the website, which is downloadable, and there's an example of some of the resources which I showed you. And I'm going to skip I'm going to skip straight to the field kit. So in a minute, we're going to have a little break. But before we do, just to show you field kit for doing a bee walk. So if you are doing ad hoc recording, as I described at the beginning, where you just submit in occasional records, you don't need any of this stuff really, because you'll begin to be able to identify some of the commonest species without any equipment. But if you do decide to do a bee walk, you do need to be catching the bees and identifying them in pots. There's no avoiding it. And I will come to this a bit more in the ID section. But a net, let's pop it back onto slide view. So a net, a field bag, a hand lens, a specimen pot with a bit of rolled up kitchen roll just to gently immobilize the bee. No bees are ever harmed. They're quite sturdy bumblebees, so don't worry about that at all. And some people use a queen marker cage. If you've got bees, you'll be very familiar with that. I don't ever use that because I don't get on with them, but I know some people do identify their bees by using a queen marker cage. And some ID guides and further reading. Okay, Anna or Reese can put some of these in the chat. I would definitely recommend our book, which is ideal for beginners, from the Bumblebee Conservation Trust. It's available on our website and on Amazon, and it's £10. Really, really super useful ID guide and general guide on bumblebees. And it looks really nice on the coffee table as well. You can pick it up when you're having a cup of tea. The others are a little bit, the one in the middle, the green one, and Stephen Falk's book, this one down in the bottom right, much heavier going. And this one on the left, which is only about £3 or £4 on eBay or Amazon now, is no ID information really in there, but it's a nice one to share with kids, that one actually, very accessible. And the top right one, that's a lovely little ID guide, which is ideal for your field bag as well. I've always got that in my field bag. Okay. And there's some online resources as well for ID. Our website is really, really good. Loads of information on there. Our app to the common species is free and it's really, really good. We absolutely love it. So I would definitely recommend the Bumblebee Conservation Trust app. And if you're on Facebook, the UK Bees, Wasps and Ants Facebook page is a brilliant community with tons of experts on there, and they are always willing to help beginners with their ID, so you can post your pictures on there as well. Okay, I'm going to whiz through these. So before we finish, for a very quick comfort break, that was an absolute whistle-tops sort of whiz through that. I'm going to address any questions on beewalk before we go on to the more enjoyable bit of looking at bumblebees. So are there any questions you would like to ask me before we whiz on to the next stage?
I've got one, Claire. Apologies if I missed it because I lost connection at one point. How frequent, like kind of ideally, would you like these kind of beewalks to be done? Like how many a month or a week or so, to get a really good representation of the data, if that makes sense.
So ideally what we would like bee walkers to do is one walk once a month from March to October. So it's only 6 walks in a whole year. So it's in contrast, some of you may be familiar with butterfly, the butterfly conservation monitoring transects. They are once a week through the summer. This is only once a month. So it's a bit less onerous, but don't underestimate it. It is still a commitment. You know, sometimes I would advise people to start off doing ad hoc recording and get a bit more confident before they sign up for beewalk. But and it's also nice to do it in a group or with a friend because you know, you're not sort of grappling with some of the difficulties of it on your own. But yeah, once a month. But if you do miss a month, it doesn't matter, you know, you don't have to give up. And if you don't start it, for example, if you do one this year and you don't get it up and running until May, that's fine. Just do what you can. Okay.
And does the BBCT offer training on this, or like field days that during the summer, like to get farmers involved and doing that as almost a group session?
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing lots of online training and field sessions all over Wales this summer, which you guys are more than welcome to come along to. Now, I have put those training sessions as regional, so there may not be field days in your region this year. If Anna, could you put a link to the Bumblebee Conservation Trust event page in the chat, please? If you go on to our events page, all my online sessions, which will be similar but more in depth than tonight, you can book onto any of those online sessions, even if you're not in the region, it doesn't matter, just book on, you can sneak on. And then I can tell you where I'm doing the field days, because I haven't actually sorted that out yet. But there's going to be quite a lot in North Wales. I'm going to be doing about 10 in North Wales this year. So you can, you know, the places will be limited and they'll be bookable. So I can't guarantee you'll be able to come along, but you can certainly try to book on with everybody else, you know. Yeah. So I just saw a question about the Field Studies Council guide. It's not good enough, folks, for this. It's not comprehensive enough. If you're talking about the pull-out guide, I'm not sure. Oh, I can't lay my hands on my copy now. The FSC pull-out guide to bees is really, really basic, and it's really easy to confuse species, and they've got solitary bees on there as well. So when we go over the ID session now, you'll probably see that that's probably, well, it isn't good enough to get ID to species for beewalk or even for ad hoc recording. So I would recommend you go for the other resources that I've suggested. Okay. Are there any more? Would anyone like to put their hands up for any questions on beewalk or recording? Like I said, it was a bit of a whiz through. I'm just checking the chat now.
I'm sure I'll have lots of questions when I actually start doing it myself and
yeah,
having a go.
Oh yes, because what I didn't put up, and Anna, I'll read this out now for you to put in the chat, is the email for our beewalk officer. We've got a dedicated beewalk officer, and she is there purely to support beewalkers, answer any questions, whether it's registration, walking the beewalk, submitting data, and the email address is beewalk@bumblebeeconservation.org. Okay, and her name is Sally, and she's great. And we'll soon be launching our volunteer zone, which will also have loads of support for bee walkers, because it is, you know, it's quite a commitment to do a bee walk. We're asking quite a lot of people, and we want to give back as much as we can. Okay. So, brilliant. Thank you, Anna. So I think what we'll do now, we'll have a 3-minute break, okay, just to for me to just rest my voice for a sec and grab a drink of water or pop to the loo, and we'll start back on Bumblebee ID at 1:45. Okay, thank you. Okay.
You're hoping everyone's back at their desks, are you, Claire?
Yeah, it's 1:45 now, so right. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So welcome back, everyone. Is that okay, Anna? Reese, can you see okay?
Yep, perfect.
All good.
Brilliant. Right, okay, so last week we did, if you cast your minds back a whole 7 days, we did an introduction to bumbles. So I'm skipping all that bit of my presentation, but do remember what I told you about, you know, the seasonality and the life cycle, because that's all important in ID. So quick, very, very basic sciencey bit. Bumblebees are typical insects, so we do use a little bit of technical language when we're talking about identification. So a bumblebee has 3 body parts. It has a head, a thorax, the middle bit, and the abdomen, which is the back end. And it does have a waist underneath all that fuzz as well, which separates the thorax and abdomen. And because of all the fuzz, it's quite difficult to see those body parts, but the thorax is there. It's the middle section, which the legs and the wings come off. It's like the powerhouse of the bumblebee. And the abdomen is the bit from the waist to the end. Bumblebees don't have a tail, but we talk about the tail when we're thinking about colour patterns and banding. The females have pollen baskets on the hind tibia, as I said last week. The males don't, and the females have a sting, which the males don't, as we said last week. Underneath all of that fuzz, bumblebees are all black, every single one of them, every single species. So once they're bald, it's very, very difficult to tell them apart. They can go a bit bald as the season wears on, but the body parts are the same, with the thorax there in the middle, and then you can see the waist and the abdomen at the latter, the back half of the bee. And we call this black shiny exoskeleton, we should call that the integument. Okay, and sometimes you can see that shining through, and it can be quite misleading sometimes when you think a bee has got black patches where it hasn't. Okay, in the field we need to be mindful of the wannabes, the hoverflies in particular, which are beautiful mimics of bumblebees. It's an evolutionary trait to mimic a stinging insect. The hoverfly is here on the right and the bumblebee on the left. So when you're starting out, just be mindful that, you know, think about, are you actually looking at a bumblebee and not a hoverfly? The thing to really look at when you're a beginner, some of you might already be, you know, familiar with this, but look very much at the head. So in a bumblebee, the compound eyes are always lateral. They're always on the side with the 3 little false eyes in the middle. And the antennae in bumblebees are chunky. They're really chunky, segmented, and quite conspicuous. In the hoverflies, the compound eyes are enormous in comparison to the bumblebee, and they cover almost the whole head, almost meeting in the middle. And the antennae are much, much less conspicuous. They're almost like little tiny feather tips compared to the antennae of a bumblebee. All right, so just make, you know, get your eye in for those differences. Okay, so when you know you've got a bumblebee, one of the things we ask in Beewalk, so it's absolutely not essential, one of the bits of data we ask for is whether you've got males or females, but like I said, it's not essential, because this is the sort of stuff you really need to practice in the field. But there are a few ways in which they're different. Females have little short shorter, well, not little short, but shorter antennae than the males. So in this female, you can see her antennae are quite straight, got this very prominent elbow joint here. And in the males, they tend to be much longer and more conspicuous. Okay, I always found this feature quite hard to get my eye in. So would anyone like to put in the chat, if the females have shorter antennae and the males have longer, which one do you think? They're both the same species, these two. One's male, one's female. Anyone want to put a guess in the chat? If Risa or Anna could tell me if there's anything going in the chat, because I can't see it.
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, I'll, oh, there's 3 in, is that?
Here we go, yes. So we have got, 1 minute, let me read these out. So we've got Lucy, Wright is female, Annabelle, A is male, and Nina, B female.
Yeah, correct. Right, it took me about 3 years to get that. When working in the field, never could work. Oh, I could never get my eye in. And do you remember what I said about the pollen baskets? You can see on the female here, her hind tibia is quite sort of broad at the base and quite shiny. Difficult to see his on that one, but you're right. Well done. Male, female. I've got to try not to go over time on this because there's so much to talk about. Hind legs, again, just reiterating what I've said. This is a female queen with those beautiful adapted hind tibia. This is where she sticks her pollen lump, okay? It's like a mirrored surface, very sort of broad at the base, all right? In contrast, okay, the male is not adapted in the same way. All right, it's completely different shape and much hairier on the surface. So these 2 bees are both early bumblebees. One's male, one's female. And you can see the hind tibia in both. Would anyone like to hazard a guess which is male and which is female? You can see the antennae a little bit as well, but not such good shots of the antennae. So the males have the narrow hind tibia, the females have their lovely, shiny, broad pollen baskets. Which one is female, I'll say?
We've got, I can't quite tell now which was the first chat on the first slide, but I think everyone's right, B, female.
Well done, okay, good. It's much harder in the field, folks, believe me. But that's right, so it'll be great if some of you can come out with me. So facial hair. Some of our common bumblebees, the males have yellow moustaches. So this is really easy. I'm not going to insult you by asking. These are both red-tailed bumblebees. That's a female, black face. That's a male, yellow face. So if you get a bumblebee with loads of bright yellow hair on its face, it's always a male, okay? But if it's got black hair, it could be either. But straight away from today, if you see a bumblebee with a bright yellow moustache, it's a male. And this is a picture I took last year of an early bumblebee queen foraging about in the leaves on the bank in our garden, because that can give you a clue to what you're seeing as well, because you wouldn't get a worker or a male foraging and rustling about in leaves like that. That can only be a queen, even though we can't really see her, okay? Right, so just to summarise, when we are identifying species, and caste, i.e. queen, worker, male, there is a suite of clues which I've gone over very briefly. So tail colour and banding we're going to do next. Facial hair, is it yellow? Legs, male or female, pollen baskets, no pollen baskets. Antennae, long or shorter. And behaviour, seasonality, all right, which we covered a bit last week as well. So here we go, finally, the common species. So all we're going to cover today are our 8 commonest species. So these are the bumblebee species in the UK and much of Europe, actually, that have managed to adapt to our changing landscape and hugely taken advantage of gardens. They have adapted to garden habitats brilliantly. Our rare and declining species haven't. That's kind of the bottom line, really. So I'm sorry if you can see this black bar on my screen. I don't know how to get rid of it, actually. It's a bit annoying. So basically the big 8 common and widespread bumblebees, it says at the top. What we do in the Bumblebee Conservation Trust is we split them initially by tail colour and banding, and we can basically split these into 4 pairs. So we've got bumblebees which have white-ish tails with 2 yellow stripes or bands. Okay, ignore the males. The males are really annoying because they will throw up anomalies. But if we just look at the queens, so 2 yellow stripes and a whitish or a buffish tail. And that's the buff-tail bumblebee and the white-tail bumblebee. So that's our first pair. Then we have the white tails and 3 yellow stripes. So both of these species have a white bottom, if you like, and 1, 2, 3 yellow bands. So there's 2 on the thorax, 1 on the abdomen. Okay, and that's the garden bumblebee, which is common in gardens, and the Heath bumblebee, which is the least widespread of all of these 8. The next pair are the gingery ones. And for those, we have the tree bumblebee, which is very distinctive with its white tail and its ginger thorax, and the common cardabee, which is we describe as all ginger. So we'll come to that in a bit. And then the final pair, what we call our red tails. One of them is actually the red-tailed bumblebee, Bombus lapidarius, and the early bumblebee, which you'll be seeing soon, which also has a reddish tail. Okay, so that's our final pair. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go through each of these pairs in a bit of detail before we come to the end and some questions. All right. So this is a sort of condensed beginner course, really. So first of all, the first pair, whitish tail, 2 yellow stripes. And we'll start with a buff-tailed bumblebee. And I'm sure that most of you have seen this spring already. These guys have started emerging, Bombus terrestris, the buff-tail. They are the really big chunky queens that you see first thing in the spring. So they're really deep buzz, very large queens. So I'm sure some of you have seen these. They have an overall dark appearance, and they have, as their name suggests, it isn't white. The queens are always buff coloured on the tail, and then 2 deep yellow bands. Okay, 1 on the thorax, 1 on the abdomen. The workers and the males differ very slightly from the queens in that their tails tend to be more white. And this poses problems because the workers of the buff tails look exactly like white tail workers as well. So I'll come to that in a sec. Don't be put off by all of this. It's a lot to take in on a PowerPoint. But yeah, so the workers and males look very similar to each other, but slightly different from their mother, if you like. And they sometimes have this buffish band across the top of the tail there. Workers and males take practice to tell apart. So if you were doing a beewalk, for example, and you saw, I'm pretty sure this is a buff tail, but I'm not sure if it's a male or a worker. I'm really not sure. Even with the clues of the antennae and the legs, it can still be hard in the field. Okay, but the queens are super obvious. Can't really mistake them for anything else. So the white-tailed bumblebee, slightly less widespread than the buff-tail, not so common in gardens. In Wales, I see it a lot on the uplands. They like heathers and things, but they do occur in gardens as well, but not quite as much as the bufftail. The queens and the workers are identical, and it's the same pattern as the bufftail. The main difference is the tails are always snowy, snowy white. And the yellow tends to be brighter and more lemony. Okay, so they're very similar to bufftails. People do mix them up, but they never have a bufftail, and the workers never have that yellowy buff band at the top of their tail. But it's so hard to tell whitetail workers from bufftail workers. We generally don't, and we record them as a buff stroke whitetail worker because it's hard to tell them apart. But male whitetails are really different from the females. And these are one of the common species that have the yellow moustache. So a male whitetail, if you remember the bufftail, looks exactly like his sister. The male whitetail doesn't. There's sexual dimorphism, as we call. The sexes are different. So this is one of the guys with a bright yellow moustache and lots of yellow fluff. Okay, rather scruffy looking. And like I said, workers are almost impossible to separate between buff and whitetail, all right, because they look identical. Okay, next pair, whitetail this time and 3 yellow stripes. This is super common in gardens. It won't be out for a few weeks yet, the garden bumblebee. Very striking species. It's elongate, it's quite big and long. It's not as round as a bufftail. So this is one of my photographs taken on that walk that I showed you on the beewalk around my village. This is a queen garden bumblebee. So she looks a bit like a buff or whitetail, but then you can see she's got an extra yellow stripe just there. So she's got 1, 2, 3, and a lovely white tail. And there's her pollen basket. And the workers are just miniatures of the queens. They look exactly the same as their mothers, just smaller. And the males look similar too. So the only clue you've got for this male is his long antennae. Again, so if you just say, oh, I can't do this, can't tell males and females apart. But what they have got, all 3 casts in this species have a horsey face. And there's that picture again. Really, really long bumblebee face. And that's because the garden bumblebee has the longest tongue of any British bumblebee. And they love deep flowers. So they love foxglove, things like monkshood, peas and beans. These will be good pollinators of your legume crops. So it's a really nice species, and I'm sure you'll see these on your land this summer. The next one in the pair has the same banding, same pattern, white tail, 3 yellow stripes, but this is a little fluffy species. It's very rounded and it has a really, really sweet round face, not the big long horsey face. And this is the Heath bumblebee, and it is my favourite bumblebee species in Britain. It's strongly associated with heathers. So you're unlikely to see it in your garden, though they do crop up in gardens, but loves the heathlands of Wales, both coastland and upland. And it's super fluffy, little heart-shaped face, much fluffier than the garden bumblebee. And you can see 1, 2, 3 stripes and a white bum. Okay, the males have a yellow moustache. So very similar to the females, but it's one of the ones with a yellow moustache. And I must apologise because our diagram on our website is wrong and it needs correcting. That should be a yellow face on the male. I think I'll just go over that with a, with a pen on the screen or something. But yeah, a little yellow face. So I saw them around Conway actually last year on a field day. Lovely species, the Heath bumblebee. Okay. So next pair, the gingers. All right, the tree bumblebee didn't come into Britain until 2001. and it's spread everywhere. It's up in the north of Scotland, it's gone over to Ireland. It has colonized Britain really quickly after being at the northern limit of its range down, you know, to the south of us in Europe. So this could be a climate change, natural colonization, and that's the best guess that we have why that has come across from mainland Europe. Stunning bee, really beautiful, really distinctive. You are going to see it in your gardens, and there's no other bee that has a gingery thorax with black, then a snowy white tail. Males, females, this is an easy one. Males, females, and queens all the same, just differ in size. Okay, and sometimes the tail isn't that obvious, like on that one. Just looks like a little bit of fuzz, white fuzz there at the end. But just to show you how tricky bumblebees can be, there's a melanic form. So sometimes they appear almost all black, but they still have a white tail. And it is actually relatively common to see that in your garden. But don't worry too much about that. You know, that's going into the realms of more advanced ID. Basically, most of your tree bumblebees will look like this. So look out for them. They love nesting in bird boxes, absolutely love it. And in your roof, they're a bit of a pest. So the other ginger one is one of probably our UK's most common bumblebee, the common carder bee. It's all ginger all over. The males, the workers, the queens, all very, very similar, but also all highly variable. So this is a species that doesn't have consistent colouring. It's always ginger, and it always has black on the abdomen mixed in with the ginger, but it varies. So you can see this one is lovely golden ginger, whereas this one appears quite black. So it's variable, but if you see a gingery bumblebee without a white tail, it'll be the common carder, okay, in your gardens. And it has a creaminess on the sides, which the tree bumblebee never has. And it always has black hairs on the abdomen to varying extents. And this is really common in gardens, and it'll stay till as long as October. So if you've got raggedy bumblebees in your garden in October, it's most likely a common carder bee. And the last pair, stay with me folks, we're nearly done. I know it's an awful lot of information, but the last pair are the red-tailed ones. So the early bumblebee is a beautiful species. It'll be coming out any time now, the queens will emerge, and it has a little orangey red tip right at the end of the tail and 2 yellow stripes. So the queens look like this. It's a beautiful species, one of the fluffy ones again, a bit like the Heath bumblebee. Little orangey tip to the tail, and then 1, 2 lovely bright yellow stripes. See a pollen basket there. But this one's a horror because it's pretty much the only species where the workers, the female workers, don't always look like their mother. And the female workers, you'll often see little tiny worker bumblebees with a yellow collar, a little orangey bottom there, but they lose the second yellow stripe. So the workers can look just like they've only got 1 stripe and then the orangey tip to their bottom. And you will get these in your gardens, really common. The males are gorgeous. They're little fluff balls. And they've got when they're fresh, they've got that lovely orangey tail. Loads of yellow, including the yellow moustache, which this time is correct on the diagram. Okay, so if you find real little bright yellow fluff balls in your garden with this lovely orangey tail, it'll be male early bumblebees, and they come out in May. The males come out really early. So this species they're all very early emerging, hence its name. and the workers can be tiny, absolutely tiny. It's our smallest UK species. And last but not least, the beautiful red-tailed bumblebee. In contrast to the early bumblebee, the red is brighter and it goes further up the abdomen, so it's more extensive, okay? The queens and the workers are the same, all black with a red bum. So it's one of the easiest to learn. The queens are stunning. They're generally quite big and beautiful, like black velvet. See that lovely pollen basket there? The males are really quite different. So this is the fourth one with a yellow beard and moustache. But he also has all of this yellow collar, like a ruff around his neck, and often other little sort of speckles of yellow as well. The females never, ever, ever have that. So if you get a red-tailed bumblebee, you can tell whether it's male or female without any other clues other than the colour. The only trouble is with this one, it really does fade. And by the end of the season, because the males persist for quite a long time in the sun, they end up kind of silver all over. So that can be a little bit annoying when you're doing your bee walks in August. But once you get used to it, you know, you can spot them. But it's a beautiful bee, and it's very, very common, and actually really common on things like bedspot trefoil, very common in meadows. I've observed. Yeah, and clovers and things like that. Okay, so resources. There's a link, Anna, on the link sheet. There's a link to this. This is a downloadable sheet, which Anna will now put into the chat for you, which is on our website, so you can download that and print it off. And again, same as before, I don't need to go through these again. There's the app, the beginner's book, and I've put Stephen Falk's book on there. So the app, this sheet and this book on the right are all brilliant for beginners. And, you know, all that I've told you in quite a rush tonight, you can go back and then look at all of that information at your leisure. We won't worry about that now, though there is other ways to help the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, which that's a slide I just put in for a bit of extra information. And that is where we will stop. We've got time for some questions. If you want me to go back over any pictures or anything, we can, but I'll stop sharing for now. And I'll ask Reese to please do feel free to put your hand up and speak out if you'd like to have a chat, or I can answer questions in the chat.
I've got a question, Claire, if that's all right. Just to the untrained eye, I guess it's very difficult, isn't it, to kind of tell these bumblebees apart. Kind of from your experience, how long does it take to really get your eye in and be able to sort of differentiate between those really common species and kind of subspecies as well?
It's a really good question. It's almost impossible to answer, because I had someone send me a picture the other day, and I sent what I thought it was to my boss, and I was totally wrong. Because it's been a year since I looked at any bumblebees. You know, your knowledge sort of ebbs and flows. But if you take what I've given you tonight and you go and download the sheet and go out in the garden, I would say if you do that over a few weekends or whatever in the spring and summer, you will start to see the differences, and you will start, for example, to see red tails. And after a while, you'll be bored with red tails because you'll know it, okay? And garden bumblebees the same. So you will be beginning to extend your knowledge. it becomes harder with things like the buff and whitetails, the things you can mix up easily. But a day in the field with like myself and Anna, you'd start to get it. You would start to get it. So a day of learning with somebody else, you'd start to improve, but you've got to keep revisiting it. And I am still, Anna and I think Anna won't mind me saying this, we're both still totally learning, aren't we, Anna?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And as a team, as a staff team, you know, we'll be sent pictures and there'll be like massive discussions. Oh, it's this. No, I think it's that. So it takes time. And what I try to say to people is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't expect to know it all straight away, but you will get there. You know, I would say.
I guess those principles apply to IDing, like kind of any wildlife, really, isn't it? Kind of once you get your eye in and you're able to identify the common species, you kind of have a better idea then of kind of knowing what you don't know, because if you don't know anything, it's a bit overwhelming, isn't it? But then once you get your eye in, it's half the battle then, I think.
Knowing what you don't know, it's striking a balance between not being gung-ho about it and thinking you know everything, and then, or the other extreme, not submitting any records or not doing a beewalk because you're terrified of getting it wrong. You know, it's striking a balance between those two things. And the only way you can do it and start submitting data and start recording these amazing little creatures is by having a go. So yeah, that's the only advice. And some people get it really quickly and others take longer. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Nina. Why is it the males have long antennae?
I don't know from an evolutionary perspective, but when you look at the antennae through a hand lens or under the microscope, the reason is that bumblebee antennae is segmented. They're like little worms, you know, like a segmented worm. And the males have 13 segments and the females have 12. So that's why they appear longer. But why it should be in terms of an evolutionary advantage or reason, I don't know.
There's a question from Randy. Are there any species of bumblebees that can be raised in southern Alaska, USA? So at the side of the world. Raised? Yeah. Randy, I don't know if you want, if you're still on and want to elaborate on what you meant by that question or not.
Hi, Randy. Are you in Alaska? Wow, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I'm guessing there are bumblebees in Alaska because they go right up to the Arctic Circle, and bumblebees are native to North America just as they are here. So I would say, Randy, we could set you a challenge. Can you find out for us what species are in Alaska? Because I don't know. I don't know the American species at all. One or two of our colleagues do, but not me, unfortunately. But yeah, if you have any information, you know, if you can do a bit of Googling, brilliant. Thank you, Randy. That'll be brilliant, because then we'll be learning stuff from you as well.
I'll just mention Eliza's comment as well, Claire, saying this is the best bumblebee ID guide I've ever seen. So yeah, give yourself a pat on the back there. Well done.
That's really, really kind. Well, it was a bit of a, like I say, normally I'd take an hour and a half just to do the ID bit. So I was conscious that I was rushing a little bit, but I think hopefully, you know, you can either pick up, like I said, I can take you into the fold of my project, Skills for Bees. If the link to my project could go in the chat as well, that would be good. And if you register as a bee walker, you know, don't expect to know everything from tonight. You can, our volunteer zone will be launched later this year, which is going to be brilliant. We're going to have talks, we're going to have Bumblebee ID information, quizzes, there'll be a forum. So yeah. What's that? Will wild bumblebees inhabit a hive if the hive is right? Yeah, no, wild bumblebees don't use hives, Randy. They have very specific nesting requirements, and they wouldn't use a bumblebee hive. Yeah, they have different nesting requirements depending on species. So the best thing you can do to attract bumblebees to your land, wherever you are in the world, is to look what native species you have and create areas in your garden that they would be attracted to. So in the UK, a lot of bumblebees like using old rodent burrows like mouse and vole burrows. So if you have really good hedgerows, I mean, this is a good thing for your farming community, really good hedgerows, hedge banks, like in Pembrokeshire, we've got the traditional hedge banks, which are like dry stone walls interspersed with turf and plants, etc., with a hedge on the top. That's perfect small mammal habitat, and that consequently provides nesting space for bumblebees. Also, on your farms, a lot of our bumblebees are above ground nesters, in that they'll nest on the surface of the ground in tusky grass. So if you can leave field corners or margins completely unmown, so you get lots and lots of tussocks, that's really good for the carder bees. Yeah, what else on nesting? I've seen footage of bumblebee queens fighting blue tips to take over the nest box. That's quite entertaining. And I have been told anecdotally that they will scare out small mammals from their nests and take over as well. So they're like super feisty. One of the biggest predators of bumblebees, if you've got badgers on your land, you're likely to have less bumblebees, because badgers love eating the nests. And they are the only thing that will really, they don't care about the stings, they just go in there and they decimate them. So yeah, if you've got lots of badger sets, you'll probably have fewer bumblebee nests, as is the way in the landscape. Yeah, any other questions before we've got 8 minutes to go?
I'm just going to ask Claire, is there an initiative that kind of pairs up, I guess, volunteers with farmers when it comes to sort of monitoring what pollinators and bumblebees we have on our farms? Just you know, for farmers that are really busy but really interested in knowing what bumblebees they have, whether, you know, you can ask someone to do a bee walk on someone's farm and then share that data, especially kind of on future schemes in Wales that are likely to be more focused on kind of self-monitoring.
Yeah,
there's not enough hours in the day to do farm work at sometimes. Yeah, whether that can kind of help in any situation.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Reese. And there is an initiative, and it's called Me and Anna. So Anna and I are working on separately funded projects. But what we're increasingly realising, especially on the back of these talks, is that we need to work together and we need to link up. Now, Anna, luckily, both of our projects run for the same extent of time. So they both finish in 2024. That's right, isn't it, Anna? Yours is...
I'm 2023, but we are going to try and extend it.
When in 23, Anna?
The end. So
oh, that's
the end
okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
So we've got another 2. So we've got this season and next season, haven't we?
Yeah.
So I think this is a discussion for Anna and I to have, but I think Anna has already asked me this, like about volunteers from my project actually, you know, if she identifies farms where the farmer wants beewalk done but can't do it themselves, could we link them up with a volunteer, exactly as you just said? And I think maybe for next year, on the basis of what we do this year, Anna and I can perhaps put that in place, because by then I will have trained up a lot more people, and my project will be better established, and perhaps with that is something we can do more formally. Yeah, there's a lot of comments in the chat. Reese, are you keeping an eye on the chat?
Yeah, there's a question from Randy. Do wild bumblebees make honey?
No, bumblebees don't make honey. They have a sort of honey stomach where they do store nectar for regurgitating to mix with pollen for their young, but they don't make honey in the sense that we know it at all. No. There's only in the world there are approximately 25,000 species of bees. There's only 250 bumblebees in the world. I think there are around about, this is an approximate figure, out of the 25,000, there's about 10 species that actually make honey of bees. 250 are bumblebees, and all of the rest are solitary bees. So in fact, honey making bees are a minuscule pool.
Sorry, my connection, I lost connection for a second.
Don't worry. I'm going to actually ask everyone a question now. I was going to do a poll at the end of this session, and I didn't for various reasons, partly because I knew we'd be a bit short of time. Could I ask everyone a favour that's still here? I know a couple of people have left now, but could everyone put in the chat, if I ask you from this talk and from last week, do you think you would go on to possibly start identifying and recording bumblebees on your land, either by submitting ad hoc records or by beewalk? Could you just, it doesn't even matter if I don't have your name, if you just say, yes, I am going to go on, you know, it's not a commitment, it's just for me to get an idea, me and Anna to get an idea of how many people might go on from this and, you know, look at the resources, have a think about starting to identify as spring continues, have a think about possibly recording. If you could put something in the chat, just to give us an idea, that would be amazing. And Reese, that's brilliant, thank you. And I am doing loads of field days in your area, so hopefully I'll be able to meet you if you, well, you might be busy, but thank you, Nina, that's great. Just a yes, I would, or a no, probably not, or I may do, would be fine, because it'll just give us a little bit of evaluation. Great stuff. That's great, David. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and yeah, totally understand, Brenda. But even occasional ad hoc record, if we can get more people in Wales submitting even 5 bumblebee records in a year, that's really worth us having. Brilliant. Thanks everybody. I think we just, is there anything else, Reese or Anna? Anna, you wanted to say thank you to the funders, didn't you?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to BioNet, who are the local nature partnership for North East Wales. I mentioned last week that they gave us some funding this year to visit farms in the northeast of Wales and do management plans for them. and buy them some seed, but they also funded these talks, so thank you to them.
Brilliant. Yeah, and thank you to Reese as well and NFFN for hosting this. It's been absolutely brilliant for me because I don't usually get to work with farmers and landowners, so I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the both of you and Stuart as well, who talked at the last session. No, it's been amazing, and hopefully, we can do something maybe on farm over the summer when the weather's a bit nicer and more bumblebees are out. But no, it's been a pleasure, and yeah, these sessions will be recorded as well, so hopefully people will view them retrospectively as well. So no, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch.